Hi, welcome to Ideas and Impact, a thought leadership series featuring conversation with people whose ideas are shaping our world and our region. Before we get going, I'd like to stop and take a moment to acknowledge that we are here today on the traditional lands of the Lekwungen-speaking people, today known as the Songhees and Esquimalt. I'm Emily de Rosenroll, the CEO of the South Island Prosperity Partnership, Greater Victoria's hub for economic development. We're pleased to host Ideas and Impact with our sponsor today, the University of Victoria. UVic is an internationally renowned center for teaching and research that tackles essential issues, improves lives, and makes a vital impact across the globe. I'd first like to introduce our moderator, Carrie Slavens, who is South Island Prosperity Partnership's Director of Engagement. As a former editor-in-chief of Douglas Magazine, Carrie has played a key role in telling Greater Victoria's stories of innovation and entrepreneurship and helping to shape our vibrant business narrative. She continues this theme today with her work under the South Island Prosperity Partnership. And of course, we're so fortunate to have Dr. Tim Moonen with us today, all the way from the UK via Zoom. Tim is the co-founder of the Business of Cities, a global urban institute for urban intelligence. And we've been working for several months with him to explore how we tell a new and authentic story about our region to a global audience. Our goal is to attract business, investment, and high quality jobs while protecting our high quality of life and our strong regional values. Tim has advised leaders in cities from Amsterdam to Brisbane, Oslo, and Philadelphia, all on strategies for what we call global fluency. He has co-authored over 50 books and reports on global city competitiveness, governance, and performance, and his work today shapes how we view the role of 21st century cities. And now I'm going to turn the floor over to Carrie for what I know is going to be a wonderful interview with Dr. Tim Moonen, followed by Q&A where everyone can ask their own questions. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Emily. And welcome, Tim. We're so excited to have you here. As I mentioned to you, I'm absolutely fascinated by the development of cities and how we progress. And I'm really excited to talk with you today about the lessons from vibrant mid-sized cities around the world, about how Greater Victoria can better showcase our own innovation and strength and our global identity and our visibility and our narrative. So my first question for you, at the Business of Cities firm you co-founded, you use urban intelligence, I love that term, including data analysis tools and qualitative research to benchmark cities and help them figure out how to become more intentional about how they grow and more effective on the world stage. One way to think about this is about being globally fluent. So what is global fluency and why is becoming globally fluent desirable for a city?
Thank you, Kerry. Great to have this conversation with you. And global fluency is an idea that has its origins, of course, in language. The idea of being fluent in a way is about being somewhere where you can be confident, you feel competent, you're able to understand others, and you're able to transmit your ideas and opportunities to others. And one thing that we've been observing and others observed throughout the 20th century was that cities, as global urbanization was beginning to really pick up, of course, we were moving from a global system where we were 30 or 40% urbanized to a world where we're going to be 80, 85% urbanized by the time we reach towards the end of this century. It has meant that cities have to become and have become a lot more self-aware. They have to recognize that they're part of a world that's there's a huge global trade, there's mobility in people, there's mobility in so many areas of our lives. And cities, on the one hand, suddenly recognize that they're part of this global system, and then they recognize that they share similarities with others and share opportunities with others. And also that they are a particular type, they're a particular character of city. Not all cities are the same. There's always a risk in thinking about cities and urbanization that that there is one path, one future, one journey that cities are on. In fact, cities and regions, of course, are very much of a piece. They are unique in their own way. They share a number of characteristics with a small number of other places. So global fluency is really about, firstly, understanding that fact that you are on a journey, And the role that a city plays in the world is not automatic, it's not static, it's always changing. And therefore it's always better, as you said, to be intentional about that, deliberate about what you want to become, avoid and vigilant what you don't want to become. And of course, we see many examples around the world of cities that we wouldn't want to be like, and many places that have got a lot worse because they were not intentional, they were not deliberate, they were too narrow in the way they imagined themselves. In fact, they often didn't imagine themselves at all. So global fluency is about understanding the world, knowing one's place in it, becoming confident about what you are, and realizing that there's a chance to cement and improve your local advantage, even while you become much more engaged with what's happening in the wider world.
Okay, that's fabulous. And, I know you've worked with cities around the world. Can you give me some examples of cities that have been on a successful path to global fluency? I know, for example, you worked with Oslo, which went from sort of being an icy outpost to a cool center of innovation.
That's right. Oslo's an interesting example of a city that saw itself as the underappreciated sort of younger brother of in the Scandinavian system of cities, where Stockholm and Copenhagen were hogging all of the limelight, when people perceived it to be cold and boring and sort of monocultural to a certain extent. And that actually what they've realized, and this is very much a regional approach that's been taken in Oslo, not just the city of Oslo, but very much the 30 or 40 municipalities that make up the wider region, recognizing that firstly, Oslo's is misperceived around the world in these respects, that it had a sort of a unique livability, unique appetite to become sustainable that wasn't being widely appreciated, that it needed to communicate to talent, it needed to show how it could be welcoming to people of different kinds, in a way it wasn't quite as straight-laced as people perceived it, and that it began to organize around that, and organizing a brand that was a regionally shared brand that the municipalities and businesses and the institutions own and use, and really beginning to create the urban character that you want to foster, to attract that kind of medium density, lots of amenities on tap, a sense of a nighttime economy as well as a daytime vibrancy. And they've really been on that journey 6 or 7 years and seen a real uptick in the talent they've attracted, not so much in terms of volume, but in terms of quality, in terms of what they need to diversify an economy like British Columbia's that's been historically reliant on commodities, primary industries, into the knowledge economy. So that's been a big story there. And what we observe with Oslo and with other cities, small cities, as well as large cities, is that firstly, you've got to organize if you're going to make that kind of transition. Secondly, you need a compelling story attached to it. So for example, not only Oslo, but we think of another capital like The Hague, a very small city, the capital of Holland. They've become very much organized around the brand of being the capital of peace and justice, and creating a cybersecurity specialization that's really unique in Europe now, by recognizing what it was strong for and creating an ecosystem around that. So it's brand, it's about specialization, and it's also about recognizing where you want to have your assets. So you get small cities as well that try to become a version of globally fluent by relocating things so that they're next to each other, or that there are synergies. For example, the universities next to the major anchor knowledge businesses, next to some of the creative industries. We've seen that in, for example, Newcastle and New South Wales, a small city region that's similar to Victoria in many ways. And so I think it's recognizing what you already have, building on it in each case, and telling a better story that works internally and also resonates and is meaningful and different for people looking at many cities around the world.
That's interesting. And of course, you've been working with South Island Prosperity and other stakeholders in Victoria for about the last 6 or 7 months to evaluate where we are and how we can actually move forward into the 21st century successfully. So essentially, we've been asking big questions like, who are we and who do we have the potential to become? So naturally, we want to know, Tim, some of your perceptions on the journey. And I know your report isn't completely done yet, but can you give us some teasers along the way?
Sure, and I'd say that we started out We didn't know as a team a huge amount about Greater Victoria 12 months ago, but we've been working diligently and producing a lot of analysis and comparison and insight from what's happened around the world as well. And it's really striking to us that the region is a very special and unique one for reasons that all of you on this conversation know very well, of course. Firstly, it's that unique livability equation that you have, and that sense of access to nature and access to the city, that metropolitan feel, but very much a community spirit. It's the access you have to wider markets. It's an incredible opportunity that is now arriving, both the Cascadia opportunity in terms of the markets on the Pacific Northwest coast, but also the wider journey in terms of Canada and its sort of moment, while the USA continues to have challenges in various ways, but also in terms of the Pacific, and the Asia Pacific is going to be the future in terms of the population gravity, the economic gravity, the Belt and Road projects from China that are going to really unlock the whole of the Pacific and Eurasia, shifts the whole world in your direction, I would argue. And so you have this situation where you've got huge inherited advantage. There's a whole set of trends that are working in your favor, not least, of course, COVID, and the fact that after we think about the immediate crisis and health shock and economic shock, the demand to live in locations that are well run, that are clean, green, healthy, that's where there are business capabilities, the ability to work remotely. Those things are going to be working in your favor very, very much. And then, as you mentioned right at the start, values. There's a really strong sense of the values of the region that is both a high level of, if you like, community spirit and awareness and support. That wouldn't be so surprising, but it's in terms of given your island status. But what's really striking to us is how globally conscious many parts of the region are in terms of how much of a role you're playing in global markets, how progressive some of the thinking is, and some of the leading edge work being done in universities and other institutes. So there's a real sense when you pull that all together, there's a huge advantage. But the big risk, and this is what we're beginning to observe and have observed in the work, is that those advantages don't just replicate themselves and you don't just win out by accident. You have to organize around those advantages. Firstly, tell the story. Secondly, begin to really think about what the place and space and character physically of your region will look like in future. It can't just be accidental sprawl. It has to be more intentional than that. And then thirdly, I think there's something about how you plug into Cascadia, how you really learn to make the most of that region and your special edge and the borrowed scale you can get from it. So I think we're saying huge opportunity, very unusual to see a region of your size with so much going for you, punching above your weight to a great extent. But that doesn't mean the status quo will last without, and all the things you enjoy in your region will last without more intentional action to make sure you grow well, and you manage that growth, and you become more cohesive in the way you do that. I think the conditions are there, but it will require a lot of good work, hard work, and good thinking.
Okay. And, one of the things we talk about here is there's a lot of fear around any idea of growth. And people are resistant to the idea. They tend to see the word global. It may have negative connotations. They fear higher housing prices, pressure on our infrastructure, including housing. How do city leaders work with people's fears and assumptions as we move forward?
It's a great question, Kerry. I would firstly say that it makes sense to a certain extent at face value to see why those responses are like they are. People look at cities like San Francisco, look at cities like Austin, just thinking about the USA, let alone cities all around the world where they've been through a cycle of growth and development, and it hasn't produced the kind of mix of affordability, sustainability, lifestyle, work-life balance, and community that was hoped for, that others would want, and there's a sense of wanting to avoid what others have or haven't achieved in other parts of the world. So in a certain sense, we can see the logic towards being cautious and tentative about what it means to be global and intentional and so on. But I think the 3 or 4 things I would say is, firstly, that in a way, when we're talking about being global, that's not about being all things to all people, open the, just anything's welcome, and we want to grow, build. It's very much about understanding what you offer, what you specialize in, what you want to attract. And in Victoria's case, of course, you have an aging population, a need to renew the talent base, to create a deeper labor market so that more people can come and stay for longer, put down roots, and create the kind of environment that ultimately is more cohesive. So it's firstly, I think, about understanding that you're at a crossroads, and it isn't you actually through choosing to not embrace opportunity and not trying to specialize, there is a risk that you're going to ultimately become more unaffordable. You're going to become, you're not going to develop the amenities that will attract and host the people who will work in the economy in the future. And all of the qualities that make the region so special will begin to erode and begin to fragment. So actually, I think part of what the communications task and part of what the persuasion and diplomacy task here is recognizing all of the risks and the challenges, recognizing you have to visualize the costs of not changing or not acting. You have to plan ahead and show that you're really doing the infrastructure, the hard work on affordability, on housing development, on long-term social infrastructure and benefits. And I think it's also about getting more, this is not something that's communicated by government and the public sector primarily to say we're going to become globally fluent, come with us. This is something where where business, universities, other leaders recognize this and have to develop their own engagement and advocacy tools around it. So I think it's a bit of visualization, it's a bit of persuasion, a bit of recognition of what the choice really is, and getting more organizations to see that this is their role to really paint the picture of the future and organize around it.
Okay, that's interesting. And, you touched a little bit on COVID. So COVID has changed everything. And so you've worked with cities before COVID and after the pandemic. How does this great disruptor, as we're calling it, change everything for cities? Yes,
another great question. And of course, the striking thing for us, being lucky enough to work in many parts of the world, is how differently this crisis is being perceived to a certain extent by city leaders, those working and living in cities. We might say that, there's a strong North American narrative that this somehow means the death of cities. It means that, there is not going to be an urban economy to speak of because technology will drive a high level of sort of distribution or away from the CBDs and the downtowns that make up cities, and that's a very strong narrative due to the particular journey that I think North American and particularly US cities have gone on. But actually in Europe and in Asia Pacific, there's a different kind of narrative there. There's a recognition that firstly in Europe, cities are going to become more regional. They're going to become a larger catchment, in effect, where people will choose to come in 2 or 3 days a week and come to work, perhaps, they're from further away, but within a larger region where perhaps smaller cities, smaller places will grow and succeed, but within an organized sort of framework. Whereas right now in Asia Pacific, people are back at work in many cities. They are, it's almost business as usual, and cities are continuing to grow and invest and develop. So I think firstly, we need to recognize that COVID means different things in different places. I think it means for Victoria and the region, firstly, that you're going to become much more embedded into the regional economy of Cascadia. There's going to be more people looking to potentially work and base themselves within the region and use the fact that they can access markets along the West Coast 1, 2, 3 days a week. And that's going to be a big advantage to you. But I think there's going to be much more attention to land use after this period of time. People are going to look at how You can get more things your downtowns can do more work. They can become more mixed use. They can become more hygienic and more well-managed environments for people who are going to come in and come out. They're going to collaborate with their teams and then look to do things while they're in town. And they're going to want to do different things at different times of the day and different times of the year. So I think there's going to be much more about how you make use of land in the region. It's going to have to be more intentional. And then I think there's something, of course, about how cities are going to have to retell their story and retell what the role of their resilience in the future. This is the first shock of many, almost certainly, that the cities are going to have to confront over the next 30 or 50 years. Climate change is of course, a bigger and even more complex challenge, but there are others along the way that sequence with them. So cities, I think, first, so to summarize, I think they're going to have to recognize that the old normal will not be the new normal, and that means a change in how we run our cities, how they look and feel, how you get in and out of them. I think it's going to mean that cities are going to have to be more distinctive. People are going to travel less potentially for a period of time. They're going to travel for places where there's a real reason to do so. There's a real story that they want to buy into. There are values or opportunities that are unique to that place. And I think that diversifying the economy becomes even more important. It's been a quest, I think, in the region of Victoria for quite a while, but it becomes even more urgent now, because many of the sectors in which you have the biggest competitive advantage are sectors that are going to be most disrupted. And therefore, being attuned to all of these things, COVID is an accelerator of trends that in a way were in the background, and having to really prepare for that. I know it's happening already via the task force work. And I think that's a great thing to see. Victoria, from our point of view, has been one of the regions that have been most organized in this crisis about thinking about recovery and getting on the front foot there. And that's great to see.
That's really interesting. And I know that all of our municipalities, our stakeholders are working hard right now. We have the Rising Economy Task Force, of course, that's been moving forward. One of the things that came out of the Rising Economy Task Force was a real imperative to tell our news story, if you will, across multiple sectors. I mean, everybody's aware Victoria is a beautiful place, and we want them to continue to be aware of that. But we also want them to know that we have the life sciences sector. And also that, Tim, as you know, Victoria is launching its Innovation District and Ocean Hub, the Coast Center, to really take advantage of, what they say is a $3 trillion opportunity in the global economy for ocean and marine. So it really is not just about telling one segment of the story, right? It's about looking at all of the, nuances of Victoria or Greater Victoria and our region.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And I think it's recognizing that when people around the world are perceiving cities and thinking about whether they want to buy into and support cities and, perhaps travel, perhaps move to, perhaps invest in, I think there's a recognition of a few things. Firstly, that these, that there's COVID in a way means that people are going to become, as I said, a little bit more focused, a bit more specific in what they choose to do. And I think that telling the story it's about being more unified and differentiated. So what we really mean by that is that there's so many cities out there that are going to say, we're back, we're on the front foot, we come and visit us, come here for a city break, come here to study. And actually what Victoria's chance to do here is to really tell a more inclusive story, as you were saying, that this is about, firstly, that people come in to visit for economic opportunity and the varied sectors that actually make up the economy. I don't think it's going to be only about tourism. It's going to be much more, as you said, life sciences, ocean, marine, digital and technology, creative industries. These things form a potent mix. And what I think telling the story is really to recognize that there are some fundamental things that make the region unique. And really make it special and distinctive, and that these things need to be distilled, crystallized, and the past, the present, and the future need to be told as a fluid narrative, and that all of the opportunities around oceans and the ocean economy and life sciences fit within this cohesive narrative. And I think more people telling the story of the region and the unique character that it has, more of a recognition that it's about value, it's about character, it's about the DNA and the values of the place that are a part of that story, rather than just more of a what you might sometimes call a transactional or sales-led approach of just come here for an opportunity or come here for a short-term experience. I think this is going to be more important to what storytelling is. When we see about how Helsinki, how Copenhagen, how Glasgow, how cities, particularly in Europe, are really thinking about the future, this is really what they're doing. They're recognizing that everyone has to tell more of the same story, and that story needs to be more about the premium or the differentiated aspects of the region, not just the easy wins that people would often try to trade in before.
Okay, and that's a very good point. Now, Tim, as you're probably aware, Greater Victoria is made up of 13 municipalities. I don't know if any other cities you've worked with are quite so segmented, but a big question I have is, I mean, they each have their own distinct needs and goals, and then the overarching regional goals. How do cities that are highly regionalized like ours actually come together to approach the idea of global fluency?
Well, another great question. And I think it may surprise you to know that actually many other regions that may from the outside seem cohesive are highly fragmented in terms of, as I mentioned, Oslo has more than 40 municipalities, Stockholm has 54. We won't get into Paris, but there are over 1,000 local government entities in the region of Paris. It's a much bigger region, but even on a per capita basis, it's more fragmented than Greater Victoria. I doesn't mean to say 13 municipalities working in sync is an easy task by any means, but I think what it does mean is that, firstly, leadership doesn't necessarily come always from building that really tight municipal alliance on these agendas. Often it needs to come from either firstly the core city, but then secondly business and civic leaders. You've got fabulous institutions, brilliant business leaders with great acumen within the region. Often they are really at the heart of telling the new story. If we think about how Miami told its new story, how Barcelona told its new story, that was both beginning in the 1990s, but then more recently in Scandinavia, even in regions in Australia, it's very much not a municipalities purely getting together and everything else follows. Actually, other actors, other leaders take the charge. And I would suggest that starting small, starting purposeful, recognizing the shared equation that benefit everybody is the way to go. Agreeing what is the distinctive asset that really you want to take forward, and encouraging more of the wider, what we call the distributed leadership of the region to really take this forward more proactively themselves. That's something that I would in general observe. There has been historic reticence in the region for those outside government to be very proactive. There's what I would call a latent willingness to do so, but not the confidence and the real dynamism to really become the vocal champions of what Victoria's future and its story. And I think that's what I'd like to see and what I'd expect to see going forward.
Okay, that's really interesting. Now you have identified 10 traits of global fluency. I'm wondering if you could just run through those for us, Tim. I love asking for these listicles, but this is a really fascinating list you've developed.
Yes, and this is work that we did in tandem with the Brookings Institution. This was 7 or 8 years ago now, but it retains great power, great relevance, and of course it was really built to really express the idea that one can no longer rely on one's domestic market or one's local historic opportunities to succeed, given, as we've discussed, the mobility of people and the shift towards needing to become more globally traded in one's economy. So there are different dimensions here. Sometimes what we might say is that there are 10 traits, as you say, and some of these are things that you might inherit your physical and geographical situation. And I think that there is something really special in Victoria about your physical character and island character and island position, but also your strategic location facing out to the Pacific, and of course along the west coast. So there's things you inherit, and there are things you are deliberate about. And the things you're deliberate about are about, where do you get your investment from? How do you ensure that you are constantly investing in updated infrastructure in the quality that you need? How are you making sure that the governance and the coordination is really responsive to new challenges? How are you building the compelling brand identity? These things were all recognized from looking at dozens of cities and working with dozens of cities all around the world. And what I would broadly say is that it doesn't mean that any given region, including Victoria, has to have all of these 10 traits locked in, or the future's doomed or anything like that, but more that first you have to think about what you have in your favor, and then start to add in 1 or 2 or 3 traits. And from our point of view, the 2 traits that I think that are really needed for the region to build in are firstly what I would call the culture of knowledge and innovation, which means building the ecosystem, the links between universities and business and accelerators and incubators and other enablers of the advanced economy. It means hosting the world around that as well. But I think it also means building this brand identity that is more compelling, more distinctive, more visible. Fundamentally, there are many parts of the world that don't know about what a special place Victoria is. And on the one hand, I can see the motivation for keeping it a well-kept secret. On the other hand, there are opportunities that you're going to want to build in around your tech economy, your sort of clean economy, and your ocean and marine agenda that I think would really benefit from that stronger identity. And it's also a way of building more local consensus. Fundamentally, I think there is a risk, and we see this in many regions, where there becomes a sort of zero-sum and slightly antagonistic relationship between those who are, if you like, somehow pro-growth and those who are anti-growth. I think partly what an identity process really helps achieve is a sense of the shared future that you were looking for, and a real civic consensus around that.
Right. And it's interesting because what I'm hearing through here is that there's tremendous benefits in moving ahead with this, and there's real risks in hunkering down and doing nothing right now. The problems won't go away. We won't get any, we won't solve anything. And in fact, we may make things worse by doing nothing. Is that correct?
We certainly won't solve anything by doing nothing and hoping that either the economy will fix itself, that the demographics will return in your favor, and that this unique quality of life will replicate itself. There's no city in the world that continues to achieve those things over many cycles without a real intentional effort. That's what we can observe from the last 50 years of experience. So I think that it's, as I say, it requires all of the things that I think are beginning to happen, which I think that's the good news. The good news is that you have a regional advocacy, regional teams that are starting to think carefully. You have business leadership becoming more confident. You have fantastic institutions that are becoming more deliberate. And there, I think, those are some of the most potent ingredients for a rethink or a recognition that the status quo cannot perpetuate itself without some deliberate bets on the future, bets on who and what you want to become. So I am optimistic, in fact, that even though I can sense, and I've sensed this through a lot of the work I've been doing in the regions, on the one hand, there's some fatigue or some doubt or some skepticism that people can change, that things can be done differently. I think that the caliber of people, of leaders, and of capabilities you've got in your region really work in your favor and will drive some of the areas of change. But one has to be patient, and one has to go step by step and work out what you can deliver first.
That's awesome. And I know one thing we've talked about is that beyond government leaders, we all play a part in Victoria's future path. So whose responsibility is it?
I think it's, if we think about the cities and the regions where that have gone on a path that is both sustainable, it's growth managed, and it's also pivoted towards the talent and the industries of the future. Those are places where, yes, the city and the city government and city leadership has been a driving force, but also other municipal leaders have stood up and said that we recognize that this is not zero sum between us and the wider region, and that we can see the journey of the region, and we're going to sequence growth and development and opportunity accordingly. And I think it's about the university leadership really being very much at the forefront of this conversation. I think it's the business leaders who are particularly influential, but also globally linked, who play a key role as ambassadors of this sort of agenda. And I think citizens, of course, are right at the heart of it. There is no city, whether you look at the Scandinavian capitals, the Mediterranean resurgent cities, those in North America who found a new path, and in Asia Pacific, where citizens are not engaged and empowered around this and taken seriously, because it's, after all, it's people that drive the future. So I believe the journey we are on is in all cities, but particularly I think in Victoria is one where leadership becomes dispersed, it becomes agile, networks have become tighter, and this is the way forward, collective intelligence, collective paths forward, rather than relying on one stakeholder, one leader to make the difference. So I really feel that it's everyone has the capacity to make a contribution, and learning what that is and getting involved with others is a core thing to aim for.
Well, it's it's been a pleasure talking with you today. We're going to move on. We have a fair amount of questions from a very engaged audience here, Tim. I mean, your work, the fact that you're talking about stories and narratives, and the fact that people are so invested in Greater Victoria. I mean, people who live here, we love our region. We just want the best for it. So I think you're going to see a lot of passion, and we'll go to a Q&A, and then I'll wrap it up and let people know where we're going with this work. I have one question here. How will micro-credential shifting, especially away from colleges and universities, although here we're seeing colleges and universities adopt it, they've become leaders in this. How will that affect the positioning you mentioned? Does it have any tie-in, micro-credentialing?
Well, I think that what I would say is that part of, COVID and the innovation economy and the change that we see going on in cities all point to a bit of a rethink about how the future of our workforce, the future of jobs, and the future role of universities and colleges in that ecosystem of training, of mentoring, of providing access and pipelines to jobs and opportunity. What we see, and what I think is an opportunity in the region, in Victoria, is that more universities are internally disrupting, if you like, and creating new paths to creating new credentials, new opportunities for people who didn't normally access via normal routes. I think we're seeing anchor tenants, leading employers begin to start working together on shared programs that are more agile to changes in the new economy. I think colleges have a role to play in all of this. So I think that we're going to gradually move to many more entry points into new jobs in the economy. There's going to be a boom in entrepreneurship into the 2020s, and finding ways to support that in a very agile way, I think, will be a big differentiator for those regions that are capable of doing it.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I should say that one of the ideas of global fluency is really that our universities, our colleges, they are a key part of that quilt of innovation, are they not? I understand that they are major attractors in drawing new companies, investment, talent to our region. Can you speak to that for a minute? Because of course we have a number of universities and colleges here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say for a region of your size, it's one of the most knowledge-rich regions, sort of pound for pound in the world, and I think that is something that is overlooked or taken for granted to a certain extent in the region. But when we compare it to other places in comparable contexts, there's an awful lot that makes it both, of course, a driver of an ongoing driver of talent attraction, but also a place, as you say, where companies recognize there are more synergies to develop, where there's a recognition that there are some real niches and areas of excellence, whether it's in digital and technology, whether it's in advanced sciences and engineering, even in the creative industries and arts as well, and humanities. I think there's a depth to the caliber to the knowledge institutions in the region that are a key. They will anchor the future to a huge extent, but that doesn't mean they do it automatically. I think there is a room to become more intentional, more organized about what it means. Cities around the world, we're seeing right now, are really saying, what roles can our anchors play in really not only just being these great institutions that generate great jobs and sort of career opportunities, but also become more involved in the community, more involved in the ecosystem. What are the ways into that? And I think that will be part of this journey for the region of Victoria.
Okay, that's really interesting. We have a question here from Connie. She says, do you see any impact on the growth of cities as employees embrace work from home, escalated by changes in the work environment due to COVID, and relocate to smaller, more affordable communities? You addressed this a little bit, but maybe go deeper into that.
Of course, this is definitely the biggest agenda that cities are concerned about. And to be frank, no one is entirely sure what proportion of the old, if you like, city economy will be retained in its 2020 form when we get to 2025. Of course, as you say, smaller cities and smaller locations are going to benefit from certain spillover or certain decisions made, particularly by those who are, in their 30s or 40s, who've developed a lot of career position and tacit knowledge that they can then leverage. Cities are going to become younger because people who have the ability, the acquired resource to move and live where they wish to and still access all the advantages of the face-to-face agglomeration, while they move, younger people will still be seeking their path. And I think that's probably when I think about what it means for Victoria, I think you have to simultaneously create the urban environment, don't forget that downtown is going to matter a great deal for a huge number of opportunities. Can't forget that. But equally, you can benefit from those who are fed up of Vancouver, who think Seattle or Portland or even San Francisco are no longer working for them, or no longer essential labor markets to be in 5 days a week. I think there is an awful lot of opportunity there. My sense is it will happen to the places where you can access a city feel and a metropolitan environment without all of the side effects. So I think it's about making sure you've got that city feel, and I don't think it's completely there yet in your downtown. And then also making sure you avoid the congestion, the sprawl, the sort of fragmentation that can arise as you develop. And that all requires hard work.
Okay, that's interesting. And we have a question here from Nikki. As you know, we have quite a growing tech industry here. And one of the things I think we've all been pretty clear about as we tell the authentic narrative of Greater Victoria is that we're not interested in becoming the next Silicon Valley or Portland, that we want to tell our own story. So Nikki is asking, with our growing tech industry, how would you suggest we position the strength in the global tech economy?
Well, I think firstly, and I know this won't be the answer exactly you're looking for, I wouldn't play down your relationships with the rest of the region and the rest of the West Coast in a certain extent. You are, of all of the island, high quality of life, relatively remote island city regions around the world, Victoria is by far the best located in terms of its proximity to the world's greatest innovation economy. There is nothing like it in Northern Europe or in East Asia or in Australia. And so I think making the most of what you already have in terms of linkages, in terms of spillovers from that, and the ways in which you are already deeply embedded in the world's greatest innovation market is important. I think secondly, it's developing a more precise set of specialisms. Sometimes I think there is a view that, you know, simply communicating we are here for tech or we are here for digital is enough. And actually, I think what people are looking for are more precise specialisms and more precise opportunities. And I think the third thing is that from what I can tell, I believe that Victoria and the region need to show how you can enter the ecosystem and participate in it. There's a certain lack of transparency, despite good efforts to try and improve that. I still feel that people don't always know that A, they are welcome, B, they can find colleagues, friends, those who can become partners in joint ventures. So you have to do more work in terms of visualizing, conveying, communicating. This is an immediate place you can immediately find your niche and create an opportunity around. So I think those are three things I would observe. I think the forces are with the region to become much more tech oriented, but as I said earlier, without some of the side effects that have occurred in other places where that happened.
Okay, and I just want to follow up with another question from Nikki. She says, so why are we at a crossroads now? What is different from 10 years ago? She says, we've always attracted older populations, people who are retired, but still offer amazing resources of talent. How can we change that narrative so that we don't see our older population as a liability, but an advantage to leverage?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good point, and I've also observed, and I think some of the conversations we've been doing around the future story of the region would suggest that actually that one can, and I think should, leverage that sense of, firstly, there's a huge wealth and of expertise in the region that comes through people who've had a huge number of life experiences, who have started businesses, who have a great amount of business acumen. And that's part of what one can begin to start recognizing is an advantage of a region that may be becoming or risks becoming a little bit lopsided demographically, but with it, there are opportunities to tap into a great reservoirs of knowledge and know-how. So I think that's one element. I think it's not about saying, you know, it's all about young people, you know, are the future and you know, to hell with anyone else. It's absolutely not that. It is about recognizing that this is a place for everyone. It is about communicating a broader range of assets, not just tourism and retirement opportunities. And I think that's how you create the balance. And it's not an either or, and it shouldn't be at a risk of those who continue to enjoy visiting, coming and living in the region. Why it's different now, I think the two reasons it's different now. One is because the talent of the future is looking for depth and breadth and variety and urban feel and urban form. This is not going to change even despite COVID-19. That is a requirement that's becoming even more sort of urgent, and I think that's why this thing has to be done. And I think secondly, the why now is different is because back 10-15 years ago, we didn't have the ocean and Pacific economy opportunity as clearly, and the US innovation system and was working much more smoothly than it is today. So I think there's both push and pull factors that work to see it as different this time. There's also more leadership in place as far as I can see, and I think it's definitely now a time to work hard to seize a moment.
That's great. Julian asks, how do the most successful and competitive cities approach land use decisions? What advice would you have for the capital region in terms of that?
Land use decisions. I mean, that's a there's no right answer to these very challenging questions about where and how you choose to grow. My only broad comments here is that one has to embrace mix in one's land use. You might say that all cities in the future will be judged on how much they have transitioned from the old model of highly segregated land use to highly mixed and varied land uses. And I think Victoria and the whole region has a long way to go in that regard. I think a shift towards embracing what we would call medium density, good density rather than bad density. Often people associate forms of development and densification with towers, with anonymous sort of and generic buildings, with luxury and sort of exclusivity, or poverty and sort of mono cultural sort of development. And I think that it's about demonstrating, and I think one of the things we've seen that's happened elsewhere, you have to demonstrate what good looks like. Good growth is something that people we know is possible and it is produced, but it's not produced often enough for people to see it, to touch it, to feel it, and to know that that's what everyone is aiming for, or ought to be the gold standard. So I'd be working hard with the Arts and Innovation District and other locations that are going to be at the forefront of the next cycle, to dispel, to use those opportunities to really curate excellence, dispel the doubts that people have about what good development looks like, what good density can achieve, what we sometimes call modest density or gentle density. It's not high rise, it's not anonymous, it's not sort of single income, single activity places. I think demonstration, sampling, encouraging people to see and to shape that is really important. And that's what we see when that happens once, it gets replicated. You might say all of the Scandinavian capital cities have really been on a journey. They were not the Nordic wonderlands that people sometimes think they always had. They worked very hard at doing that themselves.
How fascinating. I think we have time for one more question. We have Jeff Bray, and Jeff is head of our Downtown Victoria Business Association. So he knows a great deal about city cores. And Jeff is asking, how far and wide should this region plan on telling its story to maximize the benefits? Sector targeted, regional targeted, global?
Yes, this is a very good question, and one that there isn't a prescriptive answer here. You have in your midst all of the intuition and knowledge about where this is going to land, in what ways, what you should target first, in a way. But what I would say is that it's a part of what global identity is about attracting unknown opportunity by creating a clearer sense of what you're about, and becoming part of what I perceive and what I expect of Victoria in the next 10 years is a sense that you are starting to be talked about as one of this vanguard of small, compact city regions that is paving the way for success, showing what city scale in a small city environment can look like, and becoming part of a series of places that host the world confidently, that become recognized, like places like Bilbao have been, Oslo, of course, we mentioned earlier, has been, places that are at the forefront of change. And I think in a certain sense, you will attract some of those opportunities by being known in that bracket. So I would say target specific niches, target the talent you really are looking for, focus on individual sectors for sure, but also make sure that you're in the running for prizes, for awards, for big opportunities to host major forums and events that can bring new people, get more curiosity and more credibility from others who don't currently know about what you have to offer.
That's interesting. And Tim, I don't know if you can answer. I just want to pop this last question in here from Sita. Will we see specialized clusters emerging within a wider region with multiple CBDs, with a web connecting these specialist clusters? Do you envision that?
I think it will happen in the regions that want that to happen and work around it. And I think that's the way that many smaller European city regions are heading towards. And that's a good model. It's an efficient model, and it's a model where there's more access to opportunity. The 15-minute city, if you like, becomes realized in its real form. I don't think it doesn't happen again by accident. It happens through a shared idea that if you create distinctive places within your region that have a unique character and specific niches and specialisms. Maybe they host certain parts of the economy, they offer certain kinds of experience. I have a sense that in Greater Victoria there is this, people pick and choose where they live according to the lifestyle they seek. And there is a nice variety, a mosaic of places that make up a potential, the sort of skeleton, if you like, of that vision that, has just been outlined. But I think it requires all of the things you're now looking to do: managed growth, bolder storytelling, innovation ecosystem building, to really make that come alive.
Oh, that's so fabulous. Well, I mean, I could talk to you for another hour, and I'm sure we have way more questions that we couldn't get to, but this is not the last you will be hearing from Tim. We hope to bring him back in various forms. And of course, this spring, we'll be awaiting Tim's final reports and his benchmarking of the city of Victoria. I want to really thank the University of Victoria for your sponsorship. We couldn't do it without you. It's fabulous that you're supporting these discussions. And I would like you to go to southislandprosperity.ca to sign up early for our next Ideas and Impact event with Christian Rangan of Engage Innovate. Christian is one of Europe's top strategy and innovation authorities, and he's here to talk about building our global ocean and marine hub to make our region a large part of the world's $3 trillion blue economy. Tim, once again, thank you so much for being here. It was great chatting with you. And we look forward to talking with you again. Thanks everyone from South Island Prosperity Partnership for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Kerry.